As a general reminder, we are recording this session, but we welcome your participation in the chat window. My name is Quill West, so that is the voice that you're hearing, although I am mostly a moderator today. So I would like to welcome you to our final CCC OER webinar of this academic school year. And our presentation today will be on designing for open pedagogy. So I'd like to start by reminding everybody that we are using Blackboard Collaborate as a tool. And you can join us by using the chat window. It's right under the list of participants. Please feel free to ask questions there. As we go through our presentations today, as a moderator, I'll be taking note of your questions, and I will share them with the presenters as we have time. And we will give plenty of time at the end of the presentations for questions. So our agenda is to do some introductions of folks. We'll talk about what CCC OER is, and then we will give our presenters a chance to talk about their wonderful projects. And finally, we'll follow up with some Q&A time. So please know that you'll have lots of time to ask questions, but if something inspires you in the moment, please put it in the chat window. We will keep track of it. So I'd like to start by introducing our presenters. Suzanne Joachim, who is a biology professor and OER coordinator at Butte College in California, and Mike Elmore, who's a political science professor at Tacoma Community College in Washington State. And these presenters have incredible things to tell you about projects they've been doing in their classes. The Community College Consortium for OER, or CCC OER, is an organization of institutions and members who are working to expand high-quality open materials and support faculty in their adoption of OER. We work as a community of practice, so we invite our members to communicate with us via a listserv and via these webinars and via monthly meetings during the school year to talk about issues that we're having in open education, to talk about better ways to ways to address challenges and ways to inspire conversations about open education. So that's what we'll be doing, and we do invite your participation. We love to have people join us in this community. CCC's OER is in 250 colleges or more, a few more than that maybe now, in 21 states and provinces. And so you can kind of see by looking at the map that we're very much clustered on the coast. But we are always seeking to expand, and we love to have new members join us and share in this conversation. So today we're talking about open pedagogy, and I think it's important to have a shared vision of what this term is, or what we're talking about when we talk about this. So the idea behind open pedagogy, which is something that comes from multiple spaces, but I always credit David Wiley because that's the first person I heard talk about it. It's the idea that we can exercise the 5 rights of open education resources in the design of assignments so that students are creating work and openly licensing it so they can benefit future classes. So instead of the student feeling like the work within the class just serves that particular class, and they've done all this work and you've graded all this work and then they don't know what to do with it, so it often gets filed in their recycling bin. We are asking, these particular projects are asking students to operate as scholars in the field they're studying in and produce work that can be shared with future students and in ways that can move the conversation of the class forward. So the idea is bettering our classes. So I am so excited about the projects we're going to hear today, and I'd like to start with Suzanne Joachim. As I said before, she's a biology professor and OER coordinator at Butte College. she told me she started working with Open Education 3 years ago, but I think it might be longer than that because she was one of the faculty who worked on the Carnegie Open Learning Initiative biology curriculum. So she has been an active participant in Open Education for quite some time. And Suzanne, I'd like to turn this over to you if you'd like to take it now.
Great, thanks, Quill. And thanks for having me on to share some of the designs that I've created for my open pedagogy in biology. So yeah, as Quill mentioned, I started my journey down the open road with the Open Learning Initiative through Carnegie Mellon. I was part of a team that created their biology textbook, and we had faculty from all over the country creating this book, and we were having these wonderful discussions about, how is this applicable? What do we want to put in the book? What's interesting for students? How is all this information connected? What's important? What's relevant? And it occurred to me that these are exactly the questions that I want my students to ask and to think about when they're learning new material. I want them to think about how does this apply and how is all this information connected. And so I started wondering, well, if I had students write a textbook in this collaborative fashion, would that foster the opportunity to help them have these discussions? And then I started wondering, what would a textbook written by students look like? A few years ago, I was deciding on which book to use in my class, and so I had students analyze the books and pick the ones that they like best. And it was really interesting for me that the books the students found the easiest to read and the most interesting and relevant were not necessarily the same ones that the faculty were most excited about. And so I really started wondering, well, what would students create? What would be, how would they design a textbook? So that was kind of my approach to this project. And as far as, there were a few challenges. So let me share my first challenge. My first challenge was we have course outlines, right? So there's a very specific set of material that students have to learn. And I'm sorry for all the text on these slides, but I wanted to show how I've helped students meet the needs of the course. So the course outline has a general objective that we have to meet. And what I did is I broke those objectives down into very specific, very granular levels. And so this is just a small example of how I did that. And what this allowed me to do is it allowed me to give students a lot of creative freedom. So I told them this is what you have to learn. And then I was able to give them the freedom to create a book that helped them learn this in the fashion that they thought was best. Now as far as if this particular learning strategy helped students learn the material, I still have tests in this class, and I thought that was important because I wanted to demonstrate that this strategy was working, and the students are doing just as well on the tests, and so that part of it is good. What I've noticed though is what's really different is how engaged students are in the class. They're much more excited about what they're doing. I've had students ask, can they come back after they graduate and continue working on this? I've had students use their capstone project for some unrelated major that they're a part of to build something for this book. And so they're really engaged, they're really excited about it. And so I feel like it's been an effective strategy that way. So this is how I allowed them to have their creative freedom while still maintaining the concepts of the course. The other piece that I was a bit concerned about was the accuracy of the information, because there's a lot of misconceptions students have about biology, and I wanted to make sure that the text we were creating had all the correct information, right? And what was really interesting to me, and this I hadn't quite expected, although I think I probably should have, is allowing students the freedom to create something on their own really brought out some misconceptions that I wouldn't have found otherwise. And so it's been a really great way to create these kind of teachable moments that I wouldn't have noticed elsewise, and have these discussions about what, whatever they find that I'm finding is maybe a little bit off. So it's been a really great teachable tool in that way. And then the third challenge that I had in starting this design was the sheer scope of the project. So there's no way a single semester of students can create an entire textbook. It's just too big of a task. And so what I created was a multi-semester project where each semester of students builds on the one before. And to keep this all straight in my head, I created a website, and I've also been putting information on the site for anyone that might be interested in trying this out in their classes. So there's sample assignments, there's things that I've learned, there's things that I might change. That's all going to be on this website. What you're seeing on the left are the various semesters. So each step is essentially 1 or 2 semesters depending on how big it is. And I'm currently on step 2. So I've tried this for 2 semesters and I'll be continuing on. I expect that the overall process to take about 5 years because I'm less concerned about rushing to get to an end product and really more concerned about using this as a teaching tool. So I'm taking it slow and steady. So what you'll see if you go to the site is on the first 2 steps it's very detailed. Later on it's more of a scaffolded idea of how I'm going to present this information to students. And as I continue through, this site will keep changing, so stay tuned. So the first semester, and this is what I did last year, what I had the students do is create an outline. And on the left what you're seeing is the outline that one of the groups created. And what I did is I broke the students up into groups and I gave them each a piece of the chapter and had them create an outline. Now I didn't want them just to take one textbook and create an outline of that because that didn't seem to really foster the idea of what would they want to create. So I required that students look at multiple sources online. And in biology we're particularly lucky because we have actually a couple of really good open textbooks online. So I had them look at those. I had textbooks in my office that they could come check out. And I asked them to look at multiple textbooks and create an outline. And to make sure that they did look at multiple textbooks, I asked them to create a justification of why they chose their particular outline and putting it together in that way. And the justification was actually one of the best places to foster that discussion that I was talking about. They really started getting into the whys. Why did they put things in a certain order, and why did we have to cover this information? I think it would make more sense in this other outline for this other group. And so they really started having these nice global discussions of how information should be connected. Now because this is the main learning activity for the class, I wanted to make sure that the students had the opportunity to engage with all of the information. So I required them to comment on the outlines of all of the other groups. I also added a piece where the students in each group had to create a glossary for their section. Biology is really vocabulary heavy, and so this was something that I wanted them to do as well. Again, because this is the main learning activity. So I wanted to make sure it was robust enough to handle the full learning concepts that they needed. And because the outline and the glossary was starting to feel a little myopic, I wanted to give this group of students an opportunity to step back and look at the big picture of why is this applicable, how is this interesting. And so I had them also create what I called the hook and the conclusion. And you've all seen these in the textbooks. It's that first page that talks about this is why this chapter matters, and that last page that talks about here's how you can apply this information. So I had them create a really rough draft of that. And I also had them create some multiple choice quiz questions just as a gentle reminder to the students that you will be tested on this, and think about how you might be tested on the information. So that was last semester. And what I have done since then is I took this outline and I cleaned it up. I removed any kind of lingering misconceptions that might be there. I filled in any blanks that the groups may have had. And for this semester, I took that outline and I broke it into smaller sections. And I had students work independently this semester, so I gave them a small piece of the outline, and I asked them to find 5 online sources that explain that information well. And the reason for this is really twofold. For next semester, when the students are going to start writing the book, I wanted to give those students a scaffolding of here's how you can approach the information. Here's a good way to start explaining this concept. I also didn't want to just loose those students freely because I found that if you do that, sometimes they go off on tangents, and I wanted to make sure that they're writing about what they're supposed to be writing about. So these are kind of the samples for them. I also had this semester students create some instructions for the writers, so specifically what should they cover, how much detail. the instructions were not it did not go as well as I had hoped. So I think if I were to do this step again, and if anyone's looking to do this step, I would have been much clearer on how much information I want in the instructions. But what was really useful, and the second reason that I took this rep for this semester, is I wanted to have an opportunity to discuss with this group of students, where do you find good online information? And that was a really powerful part of this class. We had some really great discussions about, is this a good site to pull from? Is this a reliable site? And so this really fostered the opportunity to have those discussions in a much more organic way than I've had in my other classes where I use other assignments to get at this. So that was a real success, having them discuss which of these websites is useful. A related component was I wanted these students, while they're online, I wanted them to find some good images. Because biology is real visual and we're going to need images anyways, but I figured I wanted them to start thinking about not just which websites contain good information, but also which websites contain usable information. And it was fascinating to me that this was probably the single hardest piece that students faced in this section. They're so used to, you can right-click any image and download it and it's easy. And I think a lot of folks are just not used to thinking about, should I download this? And so we had some really great discussions about what is Creative Commons, what pieces of the web are you allowed to use versus what can you use but probably shouldn't. So I'm going to actually bring that back again next semester because it was real powerful and because a lot of the images they found were actually copyrighted. So that was a tricky piece. And then I also had these students add to the quiz bag, again, as a gentle reminder that you will be tested on this. So next semester what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those outlines with the sample pages and I'm going to break them down into small pieces. And for each section of the chapter, I'm going to actually start giving students a lot more options in how they approach the information. So each section of a chapter has written components, it has pictures. Biology has some real complex kind of diagrams and flowcharts and all this sort of thing. And so for each piece of the chapter, I'm going to create a list of what students can do, and then I'm going to give them the option of picking the task that best suits their learning style. Right, so some students may choose to write a paragraph, whereas for another students they would maybe find it more interesting to create a flowchart. And so I'm going to give them those options. The challenge here I can already foresee is going to be making sure that each of these tasks is about the same size, because I don't want students to have much bigger or much smaller tasks than the rest of their colleagues. So I'll have to figure out how to manage that. Probably I would have them write a larger section versus create just the one diagram, because that tends to be a little more complicated. So this, I imagine, will take a few semesters because this is a relatively small class. And we'll start filling in the different parts of the textbook. And then once we're getting towards the end of that, step 4 is going to be editing. And what's really nice about this design is it's fairly fluid based on where the textbook is. So it's pretty easy to have some components of the class where they edit a piece of the textbook and other components where they might find some more images that were missing. And again, because I've been very clear about what they have to learn, the actual process of getting to that learning can be fairly fluid and based on what students find interesting and what they want to do. So step 4, I think, is in my mind the point at which the textbook becomes more or less usable in the outside world. Right? So that's the end of the textbook. From there, because I'd like to keep this process going, is I want to start moving to some of the ancillaries. So I want to have students create whatever study tools they think are interesting for that material. And this is, if you don't want to go the full route of creating a textbook, this is something that students really can start doing right away with whatever textbook is being used. So they can create flashcards. If you've seen like Quizlet, right, where they can create those online flashcards. They can build those. I found this Purpose Games site, which was kind of interesting for biology and for other visual kinds of fields. It's quite helpful. You can create visual study tools. And so this is free. I wouldn't ask students to pay for anything. And they can create these study tools for them and then share them with the broader world. From there, I'm going to have students also create some assessments. So this actually began when I've been writing some questions for various publishers, writing for their test banks. And it's been really interesting when they ask you to create feedback for incorrect answers. It's a really marvelous way to think about, where are the misconceptions coming from? How might a person that picked this wrong answer have gotten there, and how can I get them back on track? And again, for all these things that are marvelous for us as instructors to do, it occurred to me it would be great for students as well. So I'm going to ask them to take all those quizzes that were written before and fill in some of the feedback about how do you get students to the right answer. And then we can create more multimedia, more fun videos, animations, all these sorts of things. And this is really all possible because there are so many great online tools. So there's this one tool that I found, and I haven't tried it out too much, but it looks to be kind of interesting, where it's for instructors to create lessons. And again, for all these wonderful things that we can do, students can also do that, and it's a really great way to get them thinking about how this information can be shared and how it can be presented. And so one of the things I'm doing as a side project is getting together a list of all of the different online tools that are available to help with this process. And then we can start figuring out how we can manage those tools to get students really excited and really creating the information, making them part of the educational discourse rather than just consumers. So that is my course design. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. And we are right on time, but I'm going to go ahead and let people think about questions they might have. There's a lot of really positive chat about your process. And I do know one question that I have is, do you have your assignment designs, like the way you came up with the outlines and the actual prompts you gave the students, anywhere that we can find them?
Yes, actually, very good. Thank you. So the Google site that I showed early on, did we get that link in there?
We did, but I can post it again.
Okay. Yeah, so that link for the steps that are done actually links to, I've been doing this all in Google Docs so that the students can collaborate there. It seemed to be the cleanest way to do that. That links to the actual assignments and to the actual student submissions, so you can look at what I gave them and what they produced.
Excellent, thank you. And we're going to ask you to stay with us because there may be more questions coming up. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Mike Elmore. Mike is a political science professor at Tacoma Community College. She's been there 4 years. Mike started in open education as part of the Kaleidoscope project. And it kind of started some of the work he's going to talk about today, right, Mike?
Yes, that is correct. Oh, no, I pushed the button. Okay. Can you hear me, Quill? Okay.
Yes, we can. Thanks, Mike. It's all yours.
All right. Well, thank you. And I wanted to welcome everyone in Webland and here at TCC. Is Webland a word? Okay, so if not, I'm going to claim it as intellectual property and put a CC license on it. Nothing like starting off with a little Creative Commons humor. So, hi, I'm Mike Elmore, and I've taught political science here at Tacoma Community College for 4 years. And I also teach English for academic purposes. And EAP is the academic route for English as a second language. Suzanne, I wanted to thank you for a great presentation. I learned a lot from you this morning. And I also wanted to thank Una for inviting me to speak, and of course Quill, who not only moderates today, but also got me involved in the OER movement. And I also want to acknowledge all of my colleagues here, and particularly to Christy, our wonderful OER specialist here at TCC, and a phenomenal person as well. So I became interested in the open education movement about 4 years ago because the cost of quality textbooks was really expensive, and so I began working with a few other political science professors, starting with the Lumen Project, and then we began to share resources, text, tips, bounce ideas off of each other, and so we began writing some introductory text. And then as I was involved in the process, what I realized was what I was doing was really what oftentimes we assign our students. So why not have our students do this and me just be the guider, the facilitator. So that's what I began doing. And so in that context, I want to just, so I'm not used to, I can't walk and chew gum, so talking and clicking may work the same way. So in the context of that, I'd like to talk to you about creating test questions and really just elaborate on a lot of what Susan has already spoken about. Creating test questions is a method of assessment and expository text, and then finally just go over some of the advantages, challenges, and opportunities of using open pedagogy as a teaching tool. So first, test questions. If you've not done these types of projects in a class before, here's an excellent opportunity to begin to experiment with open pedagogy. Relatively low stakes. There are some pretty good advantages to creating test questions. So creating the test questions has a couple of advantages. First, it allows me to see what the students think is important from a set of resources, from a reading. It gives me the opportunity to provide some feedback. And it also allows me to see how the students are comprehending the material. Right? Being able to ask a precise question that elicits the correct information is a good way to see how they understand. And then also for making them or having them create an answer key, right, with the answer. So as I'm grading this, what should I be looking for as an instructor to grade how students answer the question? So. Sorry. Okay. Expository text. In writing expository text, this can be quite a project. I have not gone to the extent that Susan has. I use expository text for maybe a topic, and over time just build up a bank of 2 to 5 page essays on a particular topic. So I don't teach all of the concepts all quarters, so this allows me to pick and choose, much like an electronic textbook would. And one of the difficulties I found with students is they try and maybe look for the path of least resistance. And the first time I tried this, Wikipedia was a very common resource. So what I began to do was pre-selecting the text. I began using, sorry, let me go back. Pre-selecting the text. I used the library resources So I would find 2 or 3 books on, for example, fascism. Right? We're going to write an essay on fascism. So I would go and find 3 or 4 good quality academic sources, preview them, right? Put the links in the assignment, and that way the students weren't going all over the place. They didn't feel overwhelmed going out and looking for resources. It was already right there. So, and then, of course, we would begin the writing process. Right? So after they would read, we begin the outline. So again, like Susan, outlines do some great things. It helps the students to organize, pick out the most important topics, and begin to organize for the writing process. Outlines also help eliminate plagiarism. Right? Quality control is probably the best way to describe it. It's an iterative process, right? So the more time that I've spent working with students at each step and taking a look, did you get the right information, right? And I always would outline the essential information too, so I could compare it, right? So I have my own answer key. So when I'm taking a look, I just have my resource there. I compare it with theirs. Yeah, maybe you need to look here, here, or here, and move on to the next step. Right? Again, creating the outlines begins that research project. Right? Once the outlines are created, I will have them paraphrase. Again, taking information, putting it in your own words, essential skills that all students need to develop, and this is a great way to do it. Once the draft is completed, you have the opportunity to take a look. Again, checking for excessive quotation. Oftentimes I'll put a limit on the number of sentences or words that they can take directly from the text and forces paraphrasing. Hand it back and allow them to begin writing. After the final draft, presentations. Presentations are always a good motivator for students. Again, some students, I also do group work with these projects. Some students prefer to publicly speak. Some students prefer to write. Some people prefer to do other parts of the assignment. So again, allowing students to do different aspects of the project seems to help engage them. And then of course, knowing that they're going to stand up and present in front of their colleagues also tends to motivate them. One of the things that I learned is when the students began to do their presentations, I had some awesome, I mean really top-notch presentations. And I thought, oh, I should have recorded it, right? So I began to record some of them. So I would highly recommend recording these presentations. Again, you can use these in future classes. You can put them on the internet. Right, so the recordings are great for both in-seat and online. So there are, just as any writing project, collaborative project, there are always going to be, I originally had this titled The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and they had a little spaghetti western image, which was probably a copyright violation. So anyway, I shared that with Christy, and she goes, "Oh, don't say bad." Right? So I said, "Okay, well, how about how about the good, or the advantages, the challenges, and the opportunities, right? And really, that's really the way I look at these OER projects. Yes, there are some challenges, right? There are always challenges with any assignment. But overall, the good is far outweighs any aggravation that they may cause. Some of the takeaways, again, some of the difficulties, some students just aren't going to be enthused about this, right? That's just normal, I think. It does take time, right? Again, I tend to teach a lot of writing in my classes, writing and reading literacy, so it's just like teaching an English class, English as a second language class. So I'm a little more used to that process. But reading all these drafts, constant feedback, it will take some time. So that is something that you want to consider as you plan these projects. If your institution offers some kind of stipend, that's great. Here's an opportunity to produce materials and get paid for your work, or at least lay the groundwork so that when you do another project, you're not trying to work through and work your own bugs out in your own process. So if your institution doesn't offer any kind of assistance, then I would recommend start slow, right? Start slow and build. You don't have to complete a whole textbook in the first time out. Just start slow and work towards it. Again, fact-checking, checking for plagiarism is going to be a significant part of your work. And of course, you'll have some grumbling from some students. That's generally normal. So now that I've talked about some of the challenges, let me just share with you some of the more positive experiences that I've gotten from doing this project with students. With every project that I've done, I've had at least 1, 2, or more significant, wonderful experiences. Right? You can just watch the students grow as young scholars or scholars, emerging scholars, and it's wonderful to have that relationship, that interaction, and be a part of those students' learning. It does help teach academic work, and that's really what we're here to do is teach these students how to do academic work for future classes. The other thing that I find interesting about this is engaging the students and allowing them to create. It hits all of these components of Bloom's taxonomy. Critical thinking, it helps them become the metacognition of the awareness of metacognition in their reading and writing process, right, is deepened with open pedagogy. And then finally, if something doesn't work, you can always throw it out. Right? You don't have to use it. It's been my experience, again, 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 are really quality submissions that you can build on, and then the others, it's a learning experience. So that's the way I kind of conceptualize it. Again, put Creative Commons license on this, and I do want to emphasize, check with your policy of the institution that you work with, right, for any kind of release and any kind of legal language that, and have the students sign those releases, right? That's really important. And finally, be patient with your students as you're doing this. I think back to what it was like 30 years ago when I was a 100, 200 level undergraduate, and you know, just keep that in mind. They're learning. So just to wrap up, as you're giving instructions, be clear. Be clear. And tell them up front what you're doing, what the goals are. Be transparent with your students. I found that you get a lot better response when you do that. And finally, keep in mind that open pedagogy is a teaching tool, just like group work or any other technique. So anyway, well, thank you very much for listening to my comments, and I'll turn it back over to Quill for any questions.
First, I'm posting a link in the chat window to a video that Mike did about his experience and project that's hosted on OpenLaw. And I just want to make sure that we talk just a moment about CCCOER again. Please join us at our advisory group. To join the group, visit us at oerconsortium.org. We have some upcoming conferences where either our members or we will be presenting. So watch for those. And I noted that Una noted in the chat window that Suzanne is actually going to be at the California Online Teaching Conference. Is that the one? In the chat window. So
that's correct, Quill.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then this is our last webinar for this academic school year, but we will start new ones in the fall. So watch for those as well. We usually share those via our chat or via our listserv and via Twitter and lots of other ways. And then let's get back to folks' questions now. One of the questions that came up in the chat window, and I think that Mike and Suzanne, you both might want to answer this, and it's about getting releases to use the student work. So how do you talk to students about the open licensing on this work and sharing it, and the fact that you're going to use it again?
Sorry, I'm half deaf. Could you repeat the question, please?
I totally can. So the question really was about how you get the students to either put an open license on their work or give you permission to use it again in the future. So what are you doing to kind of make sure that you can keep using your work?
Sure. Well, that's part of the transparency that I talked about. Be clear that you would like to use this in future classes. So, and then as far as the release goes, I would like to turn that over to Christy. She has some comments that probably better address this than I could.
Hello. So technically when the student adds a Creative Commons license onto their work, that's automatically permission to use it. But because I worked in litigation before I came to academia, I tend to be a little paranoid because I always see the worst case scenarios. So we actually coordinated with our state board. Dr. Bouillon Shea helped us create a release where the student signs. So it's very explicit. Yes, I'm sharing this with a Creative Commons license and choosing which license. And we'd be happy to send that out on the listserv. And it's been reviewed by our State Attorney General. And again, it may seem redundant, but it is one piece that just causes me to sleep easier at night, that 5 years from now, if it gets challenged, we've got the releases.
So Christy, can I ask a follow-up on that? Do you as an institution have like a database of those somewhere? Is somebody archiving them in some way so that, I mean, I'm trying to picture having a student sign a release and whether or not holding that is worth it. Because the Creative Commons license, that definitely is something that is, you don't have to keep track of it necessarily, particularly if you can talk them into putting it into the Creative Commons, registering it on their website.
It's totally a choice. It's totally an option. It's just a choice we wanted our faculty to have, an option that we wanted them to have. And then they would choose where they hold on to that app.
Okay.
So for my students, I have them.
Okay, wonderful. And then I want to open this up to other questions because I'm looking back through. There's a lot of, Suzanne, talking about your project, there's a lot of conversation about the information literacy side of your assignment. We have some librarians in the room today. And then wondering if you considered that or worked with your team, or if you, can you talk a little bit about that component of the assignment that you have designed?
Sure. Yeah, I actually, I've been working with our librarians quite a bit on information literacy, kind of unrelated to classes. We were looking at creating a separate class for students on that. So I've been a part of that discussion quite a bit. And that's actually one of the reasons I created that step in the process is it is such an important component. And I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to bring that back in future steps because I would like to keep that piece of it. It was a really powerful way to remind students about where can you go for good information, especially for when we get to the more kind of politically charged topics like biotechnology. So yeah, and I actually in my instructions link to our library and our sister university's library pages on how do you find good information.
Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, we all, the librarians in the room, were making definite comments about how we see information. So literacy is so clearly in those assignments. Mike, can you share just a few minutes about, because we didn't talk about your background in teaching literacy and writing, but you talked about scaffolding your assignments and feeling natural doing that because of your background in that. Can you talk a little bit about how that scaffolding works? What are your steps to scaffold?
Yes. One of the things that, as I was listening to the conversation that I wanted to add was, and this kind of goes with the scaffolding, is understanding the level of literacy of your students. I think we kind of get into a habit of picking the stuff that's really, really good and kind of forgetting that it may not be appropriate for a 100, 200 level student just because of the vocabulary, the concepts. Right? So I also try and find some videos on these concepts so they have kind of a general sense of what it is they're going to be reading about before they begin reading, and then also finding the appropriate level for the students. I think that's really important.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we've covered all the questions from the room, so I'm going to be quiet for a moment and see if there are any other questions. Being silent on a webinar is so hard.
When you're having students write a book, do you also have a textbook that they're using in addition to that?
We have a question from here at TCC. And the question is, Susan, when you're having your students produce your textbook, do you have reference textbooks that they read and paraphrase, take information from? I know you mentioned you had a couple of really nice open source textbooks, but are there others that they're allowed to reference?
Yeah, I actually have, so the two online textbooks that are open source I'm using are OpenStax and the Open Learning Initiative that I mentioned at the very beginning. So those are available, and then I also have textbooks in my office, you know, the ones that the publishers drop off, so there's piles of them. But I let students come in and take a look at those, and I've actually asked them to do that. So one way or the other, they look at 3 textbooks.
Thank you for that. We have a question for both of you about quiz banks. So Jennifer asked about students writing their own questions and quiz questions and how excited they get. And the big comment here is when she's done this in the past, students are harder on each other when they write questions for other students. So do you find that they're coming up with more difficult questions?
They come up with great questions. Yes, they do. There's been some really interesting ways that they've approached the information. So yeah, for me though, the harder questions they come up with are the ones that I like. So that may just be my own evil twist, but I like that part of it.
I would have to agree with Susan. Students are pretty excited about this. They really enjoy doing this, and I've had some really wonderful thought-provoking questions, and I would highly recommend this exercise for anyone that wanted to begin using open pedagogy. This is probably one of the best for engagement that I found.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And there's a lot of conversation about the real life learning happening here and growing interest in open pedagogy. And I am wondering, well, first I want to one more time try Sustained Silence for about 30 seconds just to make sure everybody gets a chance to get their quiz questions in.
As they're writing their questions, I would just like to add, I get a sense from my students when they do the questions that there's a sense of control that they have in their learning process. And I think that's important too. Allowing our students to feel part of the process and have some control, it tends to reduce test anxiety.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. The ownership that they feel when you're building a course like this is really powerful for them, especially for community college students who often feel so disempowered from the educational tower. They get to step up and become part of the group, and that's a really great thing for them.
Do you use the quiz questions that your students are writing in the same quarter? So do they get to see their own quiz questions show up on a test by any chance?
Absolutely.
I don't, just because, yeah. I write mine too early, so they get used next quarter, but I kind of like that idea, yeah.
I let them use the ones that they generate, especially the short answer and maybe a long answer, right? Let them see what it is, so they'll go. And I found what they do is they will go back into the reading and find the answer, right? So it just kind of repeats this process of creating text, right? So as students begin to study, they return to the text. And that's kind of what we want them to do, is get the information from the text. So that's another question from our audience here.
Do you find it equally valuable to have students write, for example, short answer, long answer, choice, and true false? Are there particular kinds of questions you encourage for learning or for engagement?
So the question is, what types of questions do I have the students create and why? And does it help with the engagement? Yes to all three the questions. So let me just say that I have students do, for example, like 5 multiple choice, 3 short answer, and 2 long answer questions. So if they can do that and provide the keys with that, especially if it's over 1 or 2 chapters of a text, they pretty well have that covered, especially when you have, now also make this a group project so that I'm not inundated with multiple repeating questions. So, you know, a group of 4 or 5, maybe 6, and they can divide the duties up. So, yes, engagement is a lot higher because of this.
Do you notice differences in like the depth of their learning from having to write different kinds of questions, or are they all equally valuable to you?
So the question is, can I measure the depth of their learning, or do I notice a difference in the depth of their learning by writing the questions? Yes, in particular, the short and the long answers. The short answers, it depends on how they're structured, but normally they're just identifying key words of definitional is usually what I would put on some kind of test. But it's the keys to the short and the long answers is where I can see how well they understand the material. And it also gives, if you're seeing that many of the students are not picking up on the essential information that you want them to get, again, it's another opportunity for you to redirect and say, well, I've got several questions with keys, and you're answering them this way. How about if we were to look at this concept this way, or maybe here's an alternative explanation for this particular phenomena, and that way you have a chance to redirect and sure.
I'm going to comment in the chat window that I do enjoy, and we're coming up on the hour, so I'm going to fill in with some other materials real quick. But Jennifer notes that she really likes that this is a low kind of level of open pedagogy, writing the test questions or contributing test questions is a kind of lighter touch way to get into starting this conversation around open pedagogy. And it can be really useful. It also is very useful. I will say I've done it with faculty in the past where some of the open materials that are out there don't have test banks that go with them yet. And so we start with more qualitative assessments in terms of writing, but also using the test question writing process as a way of building up a test bank over time. It is more effort, but it can be really useful if you're somebody who wants to have those objective tests. Having students help write them and describe what a correct answer is can be really helpful in terms of building something, but also building study guides that go with off the side of those. Or at least that's an experience I have heard. And I think we have about 2 minutes left. I want to just make sure there's not any final questions. Okay, so I do want to thank everybody for coming. And I want to make one final plug for the CCC OER Advisory Listserv. So it's a list where we share information with one another, and we support each other, and we answer questions about open education. It's a good way to key into our community. And I just posted Una's email address to the chat window. If you would like to join us if you're not already a member of the CCC OER Advisory Listserv, please get in contact with Una. She can add you to the list if you're interested. And I just want to thank everybody for taking this time at the end of a pretty busy school year to drop in and learn about open pedagogy with our wonderful presenters. And I want to thank both Suzanne and Mike for taking the time to talk to us about their wonderful project. Thank you.
Thank you, Quill.